Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast here on the GAA Show Podcast. This is the third edition of the GAA Show Podcast. My name is Seamus Brady. I am from the Play On GAA Podcast, and here I have one hell of a team here to talk about the semi-finals which took place last weekend, and to give a little preview for the All-Ireland Hurling Final itself. Of course, you have Matt Hurley, the GAA Statsman. We have journalists then Ger McCarthy and David Byrne. Matt, I'll come to you first and we'll talk about the first game that happened on the weekend. Kilkenny-Clare. We were both sitting there last weekend pretty confident that Clare would win. Not necessarily how it turned out. Firstly, the first question will come to you for this. Do you think it was more that Kilkenny were so good or Clare just came nowhere near what they're capable of?
You could argue it's a bit of both, but I definitely argue that Clare were probably worse, to be honest with you. Like 24 wides, like that. I know I'm repeating myself with that stat throughout the week, but look, even Ger McCarthy said in commentary, you can have 24 wides in an All-Ireland semi-final. Like, it's almost a criminal offence, but no mistake about it. Kilkenny were absolutely superb in this game. TJ Reid was brilliant from frees. Adrian Mullen, underrated player in this championship. 25 points from play so far in the championship, unbelievable by him, but most of Clare's players just didn't turn up. Like, Dermot Ryan was probably the only one from wing back that, in fairness to him, turned up. The others, David Fitzgerald scored 3 points for play, but he hit a lot of wides himself. Tony Kelly didn't score for play, neither did Peter Duggan. Shane O'Donnell didn't have his best game either. Like, a lot of them Clare players didn't get into the game, and their full back line was very, very vulnerable in this game, and Kilkenny deserved it completely. And Clare, their wides caught up with them. Their turnovers were pretty poor, and Kilkenny had this game over at halftime, and by the second half, it was like a training session. And Kilkenny will now go into the All-Ireland Final with their tails up, but Clare will be wondering what on earth went wrong. Like, they are a pretty young team. They will probably bounce back from this, but look, you would have thought Clare would put up much better performance than this, but no, they didn't. And Kilkenny progressed to the All-Ireland Final.
Yeah, without doubt, because it was so frustrating watching it, because we've seen what Clare are capable of. But one thing that was obvious, and I'll come to you, Ger, for this, Kilkenny got the matchups bang on. I mean, if you're talking Hugh Lawler on Peter Duggan, Mikey Butler on Tony Kelly was probably the main one, but just all over the field, Kilkenny nailed it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I think a lot of emphasis was put on Tony Kelly and the job that Butler did on him, but I think on the Sunday game as well, Davy Fitz gave a very good analogy of the lack of quality ball that was going into him, and that wasn't by chance, that was by design. You can see what Cody and his management team would have worked on. They'd have looked at where Kelly was doing the damage earlier on in the season in Munster. He was able to just get that half a yard, yes, but the ball into him was always quality. And the half forward line of TJ Reid, Walsh and Ryan for Kilkenny, I think the work rate that they put in to nullify the half back line of Clare and the ball coming out of the full back line as well, that they'd normally be used to, was the key thing for me. I disagree with Matt on what happened and why it happened. I think Kilkenny were just too good. And I even think a lot of the wides, when you go back and look at them, were forced shots. It's that back line again, forcing Clare into them. It is an appalling high figure, but we can talk about Galway's figure when we come to talk about that semi-final with Limerick as well. But again, the pressure they were under, the Clare forwards, they wouldn't have encountered anything like that, even in the Munster Championship, to be quite honest, apart from maybe the Munster final against Limerick. And what's interesting to me about this, and I just want to go on record at saying I actually predicted Kilkenny would beat Clare in the previous podcast. I just wanted to get that up there in bright neon lights first. I did not expect them to win 26 to 20 points. Nobody did.
Yeah.
For me, the overriding feeling coming out of it and coming out of the weekend is the two best conditioned panels in the country are in the final. The All-Ireland Hurling Championship is no longer a marathon, it's a sprint. And Cork fell away, Galway just about fell away, and Clare fell away, not because they're bad teams or badly coached, but they are not able to match the conditioning of Clare or of Kilkenny and Limerick. And just a final point on it, something very interesting that TJ Reid said immediately afterwards. He said they had 4 weeks in between their last game to this game, and he mentioned the 6 to 10 training sessions. So I assume that's 6 in the evening till 10 in the evening, and that those training sessions are what led to that performance. And I think I knew Cody would come with something. I knew it would be effective, and unless Clare came up with something absolutely brilliant, to me there was only going to be one outcome. But I did not see the performance coming that we got, to be honest with you. But for me now, hurling skill is obviously the first thing you have to have. But if you don't have a conditioned 20, 25 players that can go full on, non-stop, and just, not worry about the wides count and just keep going at the level that Kilkenny and Limerick are at, we'll have the same two teams involved again next year and possibly the year after.
Yeah, that's a very good point about comparing the championship nowadays to a sprint and not a marathon anymore. And David, I'll come to you for this. There's no way that Kilkenny had in the Leinster Championship the type of game that Clare had in that Munster final against Limerick. I mean, that I was saying this on Matt's podcast there, that the level that Clare had to be at to get a draw and then to get to extra time against Limerick, like every single one of those Clare players, I think I haven't seen them play better. So do you think that there's potentially an element that they almost had nothing left in the tank after that Munster final, and they barely got past Wexford and then almost had nothing left for Kilkenny?
There's a bit of that, but I think Ger hit it on the head there with it was actually I think it was more the fact that Kilkenny, nullified Clare rather than Clare. Now you could argue that Clare hit a peak in the Munster final, but like Limerick had played that Munster final as well and played in the same intensity. I know you can argue that they are conditioned, they are more fitter than Clare, and they had the 4-week break. But, Limerick did come through that same Munster final as well. I think it was a matter, it was a combination of both, but I think it was more of a fact that Kilkenny, they had their matches down to a T, what Butler did and Tony Kelly, and it was more the supply coming into Kelly more than anything. And it's very easy to look at the wides and say, if Clare had got those wides, for example, it would have been a closer game or they would have got over the line. And in fact, they had more wides than scores, which is highly unusual. But I think, you can't solely look at those wides. I think it's more of a fact that the context of those wides, a lot of those wides were from far out because they weren't able to work it through the lines like they did against Limerick. Because, I think Kilkenny had their work done so much on Clare, and they had that extra game to watch Clare against Wexford. And no disrespect to Wexford, it is an average enough Wexford team. I saw them play Kerry in the pre-quarter-final game, and I thought they're lacking something, and the quality between Wexford and Kerry was there to see. I think without Leach in that day, it would have been a lot closer game. So I think Clare struggled over a line against an average enough Wexford team, and I just think Kilkenny had their work done on Clare then. It is a factor. The Munster final, did they hit their peak, and then it was hard to get up for the Wexford game, hard to get up for the Kilkenny game. But I think it was more the fact that Kilkenny had their work done. And see, you look at Kilkenny, and it looks at times as they're playing at a slower pace than the likes of Limerick or Clare, but it's just they create so much space for themselves, and they're able to work it through the lines in at ease. And I think Cody has changed his game over the year. He's changed Kilkenny's game over the years. He had a mix of short passing and then going long, which created space for him. And I think it was more of a combination that Kilkenny had their work done on Clare rather than Clare have hit the peak in the Munster final and then struggling to get over the line.
Yeah, well, there's absolutely no doubt that they had their work done. And Cody, is been the best in the business now for 25 years, really, since he came into the Kilkenny job. But we've spoken a lot, Matt, about Kilkenny's intensity, their conditioning, the level of fitness that they are at, and the defence, and we've talked about their matchups and everything. But down at the other end, they weren't half bad either. I mean, TJ Reid, Adrian Mullen, Mossy Keown scoring another goal. I know he was taken off, but the strength there, Walter Walsh coming in, just a lot of strength. And in my opinion, they found their best six forwards there.
And another forward that he's mentioning, Owen Cody, he hasn't really hit form in the championship, but even him at wing forward has been absolutely superb. Cian Kenny as well, Mossy Keown, as he mentioned, got a goal. Pádraig Walsh, there was actually arguments that Pádraig Walsh wouldn't start the game, and that's absolutely ludicrous. What a player he is for Kilkenny, and to think that he wouldn't start the game. Walter Walsh at the bench. So arguably Kilkenny, it was funny going into the game. We thought Clare would have a stronger bench. The likes of Shane Meehan coming on, Robin Mounsey, if he was there, maybe he could have made, maybe not. But Clare probably would have had the most energetic players. But Kilkenny probably would have had stronger players coming off the bench. And I suppose this game probably taught us something as well. Like, we all go on about how tough the Munster Championship is, which it was. It was a tough championship, and it was an excellent Munster final, probably better quality than the Leinster final. But seeing as Kilkenny hammered this Clare team out the gate, really, and there was pressure put on these Clare players, and they weren't allowed to play in some aspects the way they want to play. There's probably an argument, is Munster hurling as strong as people think? Because Clare did a good job on Cork, they did a very good job on Waterford, they hammered Tipperary as well. So, like, other than Limerick, is the quality of Munster up there? That's the thing. Like, Leinster, you could argue, yes, there's Dublin, Westmeath and Laois, but with Galway and Kilkenny, like Galway even against Limerick were absolutely superb. With Galway and Kilkenny, would you put them top 3 in the country along with Limerick? Like, that's an interesting point as well. But yeah, Kilkenny definitely the stronger players off the bench and very good players that deserve a mention as well, other than the likes of TJ Reid and Mossy Keown in that team as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's a very interesting point to bring up, you know, Galway's form as well. And Galway, of course, beat Cork in the quarterfinal to get to the semi-finals. One player that I think could play a huge part, Ger, I'll come to you for this. 2019, of course, the time that Kilkenny did beat Limerick in that semi-final. The one player that had a huge impact in my mind on that game was Conor Brown, because he went on to Cian Lynch and he did as good a job on Cian Lynch as I've seen anyone do. And he really kind of curbed his influence on the game. He's come back into the Kilkenny side now. He was playing there at midfield. Obviously, Mikey Butler did this sensational job on Tony Kelly, and he stuck with him and he stuck to his task relentlessly. Cian Lynch's fitness, we don't know, is he 100%? Is he going to be as good as he was before the injury? If he is, and if he comes back in, and if he's centre forward, if you're in the Kilkenny camp, would you be more leaning towards a Conor Brown picking him up or a Mikey Butler picking him up?
If he comes back into the centre forward position, I'd actually be more inclined to put Richie Reid on him, if I'm being honest. I understand where you're coming from. Butler did such a good job on Tony Kelly. He'd be your first choice. But Brown also, as you mentioned, last day in midfield, the amount of ground he covered just in front of Butler and sometimes behind him. But Richie Reid had the most possessions in that semi-final, 24 of any player. And he did the sweeping work, and he did the dirty work, and he did the harassing and the hassling, for me, better than any of the Kilkenny defenders, because Butler was tied up with Kelly. But I think, look, the thing with Lynch is he came on and he made an impact, but is he ready for the full rigors of 60 plus 70 whatever minutes it's going to be against that Kilkenny defence? And I think John Kiley will lean towards not starting him and having him as an impact sub. And we'll talk about the impact of the Limerick subs and how good they did against Galway in a minute. But I suppose to answer your question directly, I'd be inclined to put Richie Reid on him, simply because Reid is so energetic and does all the kind of sweeping work and covering the hard yards that you don't see to aid one of his teammates and to cut off the supply. A man-to-man marking job usually would go to Butler after what he's done on Tony Kelly and in previous matches as well. And Brown wouldn't be a bad choice, like you suggested, and he has proven that he can do it in the past, like you also mentioned. But here's the thing: we're talking about 2-3 players, options everywhere for Cody. You know, this is the thing; they're not under any pressure here, I don't think, when it comes to getting their matchups right. Because should Brown go on him and things don't start to work out well, you just switch on him. And if that doesn't work, well, you put Reid on for a while. And very few panels in the country have those options, and they're just the 3 members we haven't mentioned. You know, Carey, the other halfback, or somebody dropping deep from the centre forward line either. So to answer your question directly, if it was me, I'd have Richie Reid, but I don't think it's going to matter, because Cody's got so many options that when it comes to it, if one doesn't work out, he can always swap over to a couple of others. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of this Kilkenny team, is the versatility of their defenders, and that, you know, very easily next week, if Butler isn't marking anyone or in the final against Limerick, he could turn up, bomb you up and down the wing, and become a huge weapon going forward as well. They're that good, and they've that many options, and that's what makes them so dangerous.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of a rotation, but I'll come to you, David, there for Kilkenny's mentality this season. So they've gone into that Leinster final against Galway. They went in my mind, with a real vengeance kind of mentality. Cody was so determined to get that win back. And they were underdogs in that Leinster final, and they won it. And then they go into the semi-final against Clare, massive underdogs. And then they beat Clare out the gate. Apart from Ger, of course, called that they were going to win. But going into this final as well, they are massive underdogs again. Even though they have, you know, probably put in an incredible performance. But Limerick are just, you know, everyone been tipping them to win that All-Ireland since the start of the year. So do you think about the Kilkenny mentality? Do you think that Cody could be any happier that they've put up such an incredible performance and yet still don't find themselves as favourites for this game?
Yeah, first of all, I don't know if I go with the line that they're massive favourites. Limerick are massive underdogs. Kilkenny, Limerick are favourites. There's no doubt about that. But I think the gap is closing, and it's two interesting styles of hurling, I think. But there's no doubt that Cody and Kilkenny will, that the underdog tag does suit them, and it suited them all championship. And it's just the way they play, that you were comparing, I suppose, the Munster Championship to the Leinster Championship. I think there's fiercer rivalries in Munster, so the games might be that higher intensity. They seem like more of a battle. But, when you look at the skill levels of Galway and Kilkenny, they're geographically on their opposite side of the country. There isn't that fierce rivalry like maybe Cork, Limerick Tip, constant. Then with the round robin, it's constant. It's every week you're playing your rival, you're playing your next door neighbours in the county, where it suits Kilkenny. They seem at times if they're going through the motions. It's a style of hurling that Cody wants to play. And it looks like they have another gear in them. It looks like they did cruise past Clare, and the second half was like a training ground, like training match, as you mentioned. But I think it suits them down to the ground to be underdogs because it just suits their style of hurling. They don't need to play with that high intensity that maybe Clare had to bring Limerick to extra time. The high intensity that you associate with Cork hurling, Tipperary hurling, Kilkenny, they didn't have that as much over the years, I don't think, and it suits them down to the ground going into this game because it lets them play their own game and it lets them focus on the matchups against Limerick that will, that will try and get them over the line. And I think it'll be a very, very close game. It'll be a lot closer than I think some people will expect. I would favour Limerick, but how many people would accept Ger would have called Kilkenny to beat Clare? I'd say 99% of people were expecting the Clare win, and I think that suits Kilkenny down to the ground. That maybe a huge percentage of people are expecting the Limerick win on Sunday week.
No doubt about that. Which then we are going to move on and talk about that other semi-final, Limerick against Galway. Of course, again, Matt, coming to you for this first. Many people were expecting a really comprehensive victory for Limerick, and they got the job done. They did win, but definitely less convincing than people thought they would be. I mean, Kyle Hayes caught that ball at the end. Galway were going for a last-minute goal to level the game up, and they hung in there for long periods. And there were stages where you were thinking, Conor Whelan knocking that point over in the 66th minute to draw them level, and you were thinking, they're not getting their way really in this game. Gerard Hegarty taking off, Tom Morrissey taking off. Like, there were potential cracks there appearing in the Limerick team, or is that a bit of an exaggeration to go that far?
I honestly think it was more down to the fact how well Galway played in the second half. I thought they were brilliant in that second half period. In the first half, they performed pretty well, but they just weren't converting their chances into scores. And eventually, when Brian Concannon hit the back of the net, we were thinking, whoa, there's a game on here. And Galway really put it up to Limerick. But as you mentioned there, yes, Gerard Hegarty and Tom Morrissey went off and they performed poorly. But when you bring on lads like David Reedy, 3 points off the bench, when you have these lads coming on, and the story was really Cian Lynch and Peter Hasey coming back into the panel, and all the story then drifts towards David Reedy. What a performance by him coming onto the pitch. And I suppose Galway, their starting 15 really put it up to Limerick. But once Limerick subs, they started to come on, and there was only going to be one winner after that. And I suppose that's where Galway need to improve next year. They need to build a panel, and they do have the players that have the capabilities to do that. They have a young panel there. Brian Concannon's still a young player. Evan Nyland's still a young player. So there's still some young players in this Galway team for them to develop. And Henry Sheffield, of course, his first year, not bad to reach an All-Ireland semi-final and to lose by 3 points against Limerick. This year was always going to be a progression for Galway, but it just showed they aren't quite there yet, strength and conditioning-wise, and the bench as well. Once they improve that, they will be a threat now next year, but Limerick thoroughly deserve to win, and with the lads coming off the bench, that's a big asset for them coming into the All-Ireland final against Kilkenny.
Agreed, yeah, 100%. Ger, one thing that I found really interesting in this semi-final was, of course, some potential areas that Galway showed up where you can actually hurt Limerick. they made lots and lots of space for themselves around the midfield because the Limerick half-back line do sit deep. We've known this, Dermot Burns, Declan Hannon, and Dan Morrissey or Kyle Hayes, they have always sat deep to kind of protect the full back line. Look, it works for them. And then Will O'Donoghue and Darrell Donovan and Hegarty and Morrissey, Lynch, they kind of boss the midfield. But Galway managed to get lots of space. And one of the key stats in this part was Galway actually got off 47 shots in the game compared to Limerick's 44. So that tells you that like Galway were right up there with them. Limerick were just that bit more clinical. Do you think Kilkenny watching this will look at that and think, look, we can actually work some space around the midfield now for the likes of Adrian Mullen, who is hitting everything over the bar right now? And then what else do you think is a hole that Galway potentially exploited that Kilkenny can too?
I think what Galway did very well was they moved the Limerick half back line out of position quite effectively. Unfortunately, in the first half, they did what no team can do, and that's eventually, at the end of the game, rack up 19 wides. That's what killed them. They had 5 wides, I think it was 5 or 6 wides. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. You know, you're a statsman in the first 10 minutes alone. And at that point, I think Limerick built an early lead. Now I know they got back into it and they dragged themselves back into it, as you said. But that I would agree with Matthew. The second half performance showed me a couple of things. One, that Shefflin is learning very quickly on the job. And Matthew's point about it being his first year and the progress that they've made under him. I think somebody mentioned in one of the newspapers, this is now Shefflin's team. It wasn't necessarily his team at the start when he started and took it over, but at the end of it, no, it has very much got his mark on it. And what I'd say is the second thing for me was look at the difference in the intensity of the Galway performance compared to the Cork game. Look how much they stepped it up. Conditioning will come into it, but that can be fixed. Shooting though is the thing, because for all the conditioning, for all the game planning, for all the excellent second half performance, you cannot puck 19 wides and expect to beat Limerick. You've got to half that, or at least about 10, no more than 12, and that's the bar that you've got to hit in terms of quality against the All-Ireland champions. This is a team now who have been it'll be 4 of the last 5 All-Irelands, that they've been involved in. So you have to up your game. You have to play your best game of the season, much like Clare did in the Munster final, and that still wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. So I see potential in Galway. I liked the way the work rate they upped the work rate in the second half, and they managed to pick holes in Limerick defence, and they managed to get themselves into scoring positions without actually executing them. And that's the key thing, I think, for Shefflin, that he's got something to work with. You get beaten out the gate, or you puck like Clare 24-25 wide. You are asking yourself a lot of questions. But much like the Kilkenny performance, Limerick really, I think, Limerick learn on the fly better than any team. Kiley and his management team are brilliant at altering what they're doing. Now I know Cody brings off players, I know Shefflin brings off players. Same with Brian Lohan. They don't wait. If you're having a bad game, you're coming off. They don't care about who you are. But what Kiley and the Limerick team have done over the last 2 or 3 years, on top of everything they've got, they're able to alter the forward line. Like they can drop Gillan back if they need to. They can throw Kiley on. They've got options now. But coming out of this game, I suppose my abiding thing is I think John Kiley learned more about what he needs to do to win the All-Ireland from this performance than Cody did from what Kilkenny did to Clare. And that's good news for Limerick coming into it. There's an awful lot to work on. There's an awful lot to get right. But if Galway, I think Cody and his team will watch how Galway move them out of position. And it's not a case of one half forward making a darting run. It's a combination of things. It's knowing when to hold and go short and then go along and wait for your forwards. And that comes with experience. And I would say, just to finish the point, Shefflin, I agree with Matthew on this. Shefflin's first year has been I'd give him 8 or 9 out of 10, to be quite honest with you, because I can see what he's trying to do. And now the players are buying into it, and it's his team, and they push the All-Ireland champions, but they're still not on their level. Mm-hmm. They're still not on their level. But from Limerick's point of view, they've got to learn that if Galway can do that to them and create whatever number of scoring chances, like if they play like that and defend like that, Kilkenny will hurt them where Galway didn't. And that's the key thing for Kiley coming into it. How did we get so open? What is it that Galway did in moving of their one? At some stages there was only 2 forwards inside there. Next thing there was 4 forwards in there. What is it that they were doing that opened us up? And we allowed them for all these scoring opportunities. And I think if they can sort that out, I think they have a great chance of beating Kilkenny in the final. But as I said to you, it wasn't a vintage performance by any means by Limerick, but they are the best, and they're the best in the country the last 3 or 4 years at grinding when they need to, and then playing, champagne hurling when they need to as well. They can do it all. And physically as well, this is the other thing. Physically, they are so strong. They will wear you down as the game goes on. I think there was a bit of that from Galway, even though they were much improved in the second half. But a lot to take out of it from Shefflin and Galway. But from Limerick's point of view, they cannot afford to give up that number of chances against Kilkenny, or they will lose. So they've got to alter how they defend and when they defend. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that tactic plays out in the final against Kilkenny. But I think Kylie learned a lot more about what he needs to do more than maybe Cody did against Clare.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point, that the way that Clare just rolled over for Kilkenny and just basically let them at it. I mean, compared to Galway standing up to Limerick until the last minute of the game and making Limerick, adapt and change their ways. And David, as a Limerick man yourself, what did you see in this game? Because one thing that I've said on Matt's podcast is Limerick are true champions. I can't think of a single type of test that Limerick have not passed. They've won games where their backs have been to the wall. They've won games where teams have got the run on them at the start. They've won games where they've been nearly pulled back at the end. They've won every type of game. But in this game, what in particular impressed you about their performance?
Wasn't their best performance all year. That's without a doubt. But I think that's more of what they faced. I think Galway are probably the most physical team that they would have played all season. There's no doubt about that. Clare brought the intensity, but Galway are physically, they can match Limerick physically. What impressed me was they seem to stick. Now, Ger talked about there how they're well able to change the way they play in the middle of a game to adapt to the game and to adapt to the conditions and to adapt to everything. But they do have a system in the way they play, and now they can change within that, change positions, change the style of pass, and change everything. But they stick with the core principle of the way they play, with the six sitting back and the corner forwards making the diagonal runs and working it through the lines, and they stick with it. They believe it. They don't panic. I think that's one thing that impressed me last Sunday. That right until the final whistle, they kept plugging away in the way they were playing. There was no panic. There was no trying to hit it long. There was no trying to. Now they did one thing that impressed me. They changed their puck outs. It was probably towards before half time. They started to go a bit longer, and I think in the second half, I can't remember them winning a long puck out, or a Galway puck out. Sorry, in the second half. And I was looking at the stat there, and I think this kind of sums up the game for me. It was which is kind of a given, I suppose. Galway had 16 short puck outs to one out of them. Limerick had 19 short puck outs to one out of them. But when you look at the long puck outs, Galway won 15 out of their 26, which is nearly 60%. But Limerick only won 7 out of 22. That's wow. Galway completely dominated on the long puck outs. And Limerick were kind of forced. Galway were playing with the extra man back. I think Limerick were kind of forced to play it along to try and create space, because the midfield was completely, Galway had it controlled in midfield. They had tight mark, and I think Limerick were kind of forced to play it long. But what impressed me more than anything was the fact that they kind of kept plugging away. They kept plugging away, and then they knew that when they brought on the likes of Cian Lynch, Casey, and more than anything, Reedy, which, I think it was Reedy created space more than, and he created space for himself to get the 3 points. But I think it was just they played right down to the whistle. Even when it looked like Galway were trying to change the way they were going to play to try and get a goal, they dropped theirs back. They kept believing the way they played, and it kind of eventually pulled away. Then the game could have went either way, but they kept kind of sticking to it. They have played for the last 4 or 5 years now, which impressed me more than anything. And I think they will have learned more from that game than anything. And I think one thing that John Kiley said afterwards was that they nearly had too good of a start. They were 6 points to 1 up. And I think the difference between the Clare and Kilkenny game and the Limerick and Galway game was that a lot of Galway's wides were of their own doing. Whether I think a lot of Clare's wides were because of the way Kilkenny played. And I think Galway had chances where there was players in space, it wasn't forced wides, and it was just individual players having kind of poor first half, and they came into the game then in the second half, and it's their own. I think they could have easily brought that game to extra time, and the wides were kind of their own faults rather than force from Limerick. I thought Limerick were poor in patches. They weren't their usual playing their usual free-flowing hurling, but I think they'll have learned a lot from that game and kind of completely up the tempo in the final.
Yeah, and that was definitely a fascinating point about the long puckouts. Like, I didn't know that they, obviously when you're watching the game yourself, you kind of get a sense that they're losing puckouts, but my God, to have a bad ratio like that, 7 out of 22, on the long puckouts is crazy. And you wonder now, Kilkenny with Richie Reid there, with Michael Carey, with Paddy Deegan, all under that high ball, will they be fancying themselves to kind of force Limerick almost to go with the long puckouts and hope that the bad success rate continues? But anyway, we've talked about the two semi-finals. Now I'm going to pop the dreaded question. I'm going to go to the two Cork men first. I'm not going to ask the Limerick man who he thinks is going to win yet. But Matt, I'll start with you. Kilkenny or Limerick?
Look, I've said Limerick all throughout the year. I said Limerick are up there with what Dublin are in football, the 6 of the row team. I just think this team is so good all over the field. And I just think, like what the lads said, Limerick have probably learned more in the semi-final than Kilkenny did, and I think that'll be a huge aspect to this game. Will Cian Lynch start? I think they'll be better off benching him, to be honest with you. Bring him on later on, and all hell breaks loose from there. So I think Kilkenny might lead in the first half, but I think Limerick subs will get them over the line, and Limerick will win this game, in my opinion.
That's a great point about the Cian Lynch thing, because I was saying before the semi-final that thing to dangle over Kilkenny is so valuable. It was like the Ger McCarthy effect when he came back with Dublin. He was on the bench and he hardly played, but still teams were coming, oh God, who are we going to put on Ger McCarthy if he comes on, especially against Mayo? Like Lee Keegan was looking at the bench the whole time, is Dermot coming on? And when he wouldn't come on, Lee Keegan, maybe it took away from his focus of marking a Con O'Callaghan or someone like that. It was just those little 1%, 2%. But that's a great point about Lynch. And Ger, yourself, Limerick or Kilkenny?
I was so engrossed in your Dublin football talk there, I nearly forgot about the question for a sec. I'm delighted to see Dublin doing so well as a Corkman. It's very hard to argue with the points that Matt put forward there from Limerick. It's very hard to argue with my own point about Limerick learning on the fly. The only team to beat them in the last 3-4 years is Kilkenny in the All-Ireland Championship. They have the conditioning, they have a little bit of arrogance and a little bit of a swagger about them, and I think that's a good thing. I think you should. I think they've earned that. I think history is going to reflect very kindly on this Limerick setup and the Limerick team and where they've come from and how they've gotten there. I don't think any team in the country has the options off the bench that Limerick have, and I include Kilkenny in that. But I just can't bet against Cody. I figured Kilkenny would find a way to edge the semi-final, and they blew a really good Clare team out of the water. I think the fact that they've had time after the sprint to get to the semi-finals and 4 weeks, and look what they managed to do before hitting the pitch against Clare, that game would have brought them on hugely. There's a lot of players that were brought off that day that are fighting for their place. Same for Limerick, I know, but especially for Kilkenny. My head says that, logic dictates that Limerick should win this game. They should, based on history, based on how well they've done. And let's not forget, they've been pushed to the pin of their collar in a brilliant Munster final by Clare, and they still found a way to win. They were pushed for a lot of it by Galway, as we've explained, and why a really good coming Galway team under Shefflin, they found a way to win. And any other county, and I mean this sincerely, including Cork, not that we'd rattle it at the moment, but any other county in the final, it'd be a no-brainer. Limerick are winning it. But I was so impressed by Kilkenny the last day. Not the opposition or what they stopped the opposition from doing. Richie Reid got no press afterwards, and he was both the best player on the pitch. Butler did what he was exactly asked to do, sacrificed himself and his own performance for the good of the team. And no other team in the country, including Limerick, does that better than Kilkenny under Brian Cody. I'm going for a Kilkenny win. I don't know by what margin. It can't be much. But what worries me about Limerick is, as they may have learned, they'll learn a lot more from it. They will not get an easy long puck out the next day. Yeah. Not one. And that includes their own. they will not get a dirty ball and a clean ball in the first 10 minutes without somebody being wiped out. That's just the way it's going to be played on the edge between two teams at their absolute physical peak. But I'm going against the grain, not just for the sake of it. I'm working it out in my head and looking at what I saw in the semi-finals. And it sounds stupid in my head, to be honest with you, to go against one of the best teams of their generation in Limerick, and I mean that. But I think because of the guy on the sideline, I think because of the hurt and a little bit of needle that all the attention that Limerick have been getting perhaps over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe that might be a motivating factor. This is a Kilkenny team hitting its peak at the right time. And any time you play a Kilkenny team hitting its peak at the right time, it's because of Cody and because of the management team. I think they're going to spring it. A surprise or two in their selections as well. And I think I've seen enough chinks in the armour, not many, in the Limerick performances over the last couple of games. I still say they still managed to win, which is a sign of a great team that can change on the fly, play badly in patches, and they still find a way to win. But this is Kilkenny. This is Brian Cody. This is a real opportunity for them to stop the juggernaut. And because of that, and because I think they also have the ability to open up that Limerick defence better than Galway did, and effectively when Galway failed, I'm going to give it to Kilkenny, but only just.
Wow, well, you'll be the genius of all geniuses if it comes off. We'll all be off social media dodging your "I told you so" messages and everything. But no, so one Limerick, one Kilkenny. David, Limerick man yourself, are you going to back your home county?
Yeah, I just want to go on record that I don't think I'll ever come on the podcast again after that prediction from Parkman. Put that out there. No, do you know what? I'm really torn, to be honest with you. I don't think Limerick are at their best against Galway. And I don't think that is because any of their own doing or because they peaked against Clare or anything. I think it was just they came up against a tactical. What Shefflin did tactically was unbelievable. I think you could just see it was an extremely tactical game with the puck outs, the long puck outs. Like, we're not going to bore people going into the stats of that, but I think Cody's a genius. Cody's a tactical genius, and the fact that he's changed this Kilkenny game, he's revitalised them and he changes them. He's changed the way they've played the last couple of years, and I think they're hungrier than ever. I think they haven't won an All-Ireland now in 7 years. I'm edging towards Limerick, but I think it'll be, but I think that's just because of the strength of the team. But I do think it'll come right down to the wire. I do think Limerick will get over the line. One thing that all great teams are, they're inevitable. You look back at probably the Man United team years ago. You look at the Kilkenny team in the 2000s. They're inevitable. When it's a psychological advantage when you're playing against them. You might be 2, 3, 4 points up, but you just know that this team has done before. They've come back. They come back. Limerick have done that against teams, and I think that's what will get them over the edge. If Limerick hadn't beaten Kilkenny in 2018, I think I would have put Kilkenny as favourites, because to get over a team, I was looking at there, I think since the 1973 All-Ireland Final, they've played each other 8 times. Kilkenny have won 7 times.
Yeah, wow.
If Limerick hadn't won that quarter-final in 2018,
yeah,
it's always in your mind. The history is there that we haven't beaten this team in 45 years, whatever. And I think when they got over the line in 2018, it opened up. They just played with freedom, and they won the final then against Galway. So I think they have that advantage that way. I know Kilkenny won them and beat them in the semi-final in 2019. Limerick will be extremely hungry because of that. I'm not saying Kilkenny won't, but I just think they have that edge. I just think they have that slight edge of the way they play, and they'll play right down to the wire. It'll be extremely close. I think the teams will probably be level 6, 7, 8 times in the second half, and I think Limerick will just pull away. I think they'll win it by 2 points.
Yeah, no, so Limerick for you as well. I'm going to go pretty much bang on the same as David there. I think I'm going to go Limerick just by a short bit. I'm just going to explain why really briefly. So that game against Kilkenny in 2019, Limerick, yes, they lost, but in the last minute, Darragh O'Donovan took that sideline and it clearly hit the Kilkenny player's hurl and went out for what should have been a 65. It was given as a wide ball, and then the game was called up and Kilkenny won. Had that have been given, Shane Dowling was on the field, he likely would have stuck to 65, and then we're into extra time. So who knows what would have happened then? What we're talking about here is we're talking about a team that hasn't been touched since, apart from Clare, getting them in that Munster final and in the round robin. In every other game, no one has come near them. They've destroyed Waterford. They've destroyed Cork. You know, they beat Galway. And I know people are talking about, but look how good Galway had to be, and Limerick still beat them. And we're still sitting here saying they beat the All-Ireland champions of 2017, one of the best teams in the country. And we're still sitting there saying, yeah, it wasn't their best performance though. The level, the ceiling that Limerick have is scarily high. And that few minutes where they had against Tipperary in that Munster final was genuinely terrifying. It was like you could pick an all-time 15 against them and they'd still get mopped the floor with, because Limerick, when they ride that momentum, they're unstoppable. Kilkenny coming into this final, they've been beaten by Wexford in the Leinster Championship. They've been beaten by Galway in the Leinster Championship. There's been more, you know, cracks shown in the Kilkenny side than have been shown in the Limerick side. I know that they've more than patched it up with the victory over Galway and Clare back to back, but I'm just saying Limerick will peak, in my opinion, at the right time, and they will win this All-Ireland. That's what I'm saying. I could be wrong, of course, but Jerry, you'll be the genius if we are all wrong. Just before we wrap up, lads, of course, after the final, the All-Stars will be announced and the Hurler of the Year will be announced. And Jerry, I seen your piece where you're mentioning about Tony Kelly. So I'm going to come to you first for this one. Tony Kelly was right on course for Hurler of the Year, and then the semi-final happened. So would you still be kind of putting him down as a contender, or has someone else leapfrogged him now?
Yeah, I knew this question was coming because it's come on social media since the boys were retweeting it out. I suppose the simple answer and the quick answer is yes. I think you'd have Butler's performance there, TJ Reid's performance, for God's sake. I mean, like the way he played in the semi-final, if he repeats that in the final, and I think if Kilkenny win, I've predicted that they will, and if Reid plays well, TJ Reid being the guy that does that, I think he'll be in the running for it ahead of Tony Kelly, because the way it works, I was basing my opinion on Kelly getting it because of the way he's played all season, not just in the last couple of matches. Right through the Munster Championship, he was by far the best player in the Munster Championship, and I include Limerick in that. And that's not having to cut off Limerick. That's just me saying I think Kelly was consistently the best player in his team for all of those matches. Now, if you give the All-Star and the Hurler of the Year award to somebody for showing up in the final two matches of the season, which it happens, and it happens in other sports as well, then he's out of the running. He ain't going to win it, and the bookies aren't. I believe the bookies don't even have him in the top echelons of who might get it. So for that reason, and the way it works in the GAA, I don't think he's going to win it now. But you cannot deny what the level he was playing at consistently throughout the Munster Championship, at the end of the National League as well. Not that comes into it. For me, I hadn't seen anybody do it consistently. TJ Reid popped up every now and again. You could pick any one of the Limerick forwards. You could pick Gillan. You could pick any of them, honestly, at different stages. And especially in the Munster final, they were outstanding. But over the course of a season, if that's how we're judging it, even though he was well marked, and I felt he didn't get a chance to get going. So maybe at that point, if that's the way it works, then he's not going to win. He's not going to win it out. But up to that point, I hadn't seen a hurler more consistent or more important to his particular team, which is another important facet of it. But the way it works for Hurler of the Year is who's done it consistently towards the end of the season and might end up winning in All-Ireland. And if that's the way, it usually is the way it goes. If Limerick win it, and I think if Gillan plays well, if Cian Lynch has an outstanding game, even though he's missed most of it from injury, you can take your pick of the Limerick team. They're that good. But I think if Kilkenny win it, I think they will. I think TJ Reid will end up winning it.
Yeah, that's a very good shout. One of the funniest media pieces that I've seen was actually talking about Tony Kelly, and they were saying that if you were trying to show a youngster how to play hurling, Tony Kelly would actually be one of the last players that you'd show, because he does things that you just wouldn't tell a player to do, because no one can do what Tony Kelly can do. I mean, that last minute sideline against Limerick, he put the ball down on the ground. He didn't set it up. He didn't even look at the goal. He just kind of was like, oh yeah, I'll just have a lash at this and put it over the bar. Didn't look at it. Where he shoots from, if you were out playing a club match and a junior B fella decided to have a shot from the sideline like he's Tony Kelly, you'd be taking him off straight away. So what he can do is not what the average player can do. It's not even what the elite player can do. He isn't the elite of the elite, in my opinion. He's amazing. What the skill level that he has, it's incredible. And he's in a league of his own. But I agree with you 100%, Ger. I think that when it gets to the business end, those are the games that are fresh in your memory, and it's who did it when it really, really mattered. And I think personally, having said that, I think Limerick are going to win. I think Aaron Gillan has been fantastic throughout the entire season. Those two goals he got against Tipperary, just excellent full forward play. He was outstanding against Galway as well. So he'd be my personal pick. Matt, you were mentioning an interesting candidate throughout the season, Joseph Cooney of Galway at midfield. Of course, David was saying about how Galway had the midfield on lock against Limerick. Does that strengthen his chances of player in the year, in your opinion?
Well, I suppose I'll go back to Ger's point. Like, when two teams reach an All-Ireland final, usually that's where the player of the year is announced, regardless of how Joseph Cooley played. I still think Joseph Cooley deserves something like an All-Star. I think he's been superb for Galway. But in my honest opinion, I think if Limerick are to win it, I'd agree with you, Seamus. Aaron Gillan's been absolutely superb. He scored 318 from play. What a player he is. And a lot of people are saying he scores most of his points from frees, but he's shown this season he does a lot more. And the scores he was taking against Galway were just at the highest quality. What a player he is. If Kilkenny win it, I'd actually... TJ Reid's been superb. I wouldn't deny that. But I'd actually give it to Adrian Mullen. I just think his work in midfield has been unbelievable. 25 points from play. And I think for years now, outside of Kilkenny, I think he's been the most underrated player in the country. I think he's been absolutely superb. And I suppose it's not just the scores, it's he's running off the ball, it's his defending, it's his work rate. I think he's been superb doing that. So if Limerick win it, I think Aaron Gillan. If Kilkenny win it, I think it's going to be Adrian Mullen. That would be my picks for player of the year.
Yeah, they're two great shouts there. David, yourself?
Yeah, if I was, I was looking at there, I think with the exception of 2016, when Austin Gleeson won it, it has come from, in the last 10 years, it's come from a player, the team that won the All-Ireland, and Waterford weren't even in the All-Ireland final that year. So it is usually, it's just the way it works. I think it's usually one of the things, but there's three that stand out for me, and I think it boils down to how they play in the final. I don't think you can rule out Tony Kelly because of one game. He dominated, like he was the best player on the pitch in the Munster final. Clare's game up against Cork and Thurles, he was unbelievable. For me, it's kind of an outside one. I think it's a long time since a player that played in the back six has won Hurler of the year. I think was looking at there was Tommy Walsh in 2009 was the last that won it. So I was looking. Barry Nash, I think, has been outstanding for Limerick. Galway, he was unbelievable against Galway, and when he was kind of caught up the pitch, when Limerick were pushing up, that's when they got the goal opportunity and they scored. He's been outstanding at fullback for Limerick. I know it's very unusual for a fullback to win a player of the year, so I'd narrow it down to TJ Reid, Kelly, Gillan, or Nash, to be honest with you now, and I think Dermot Burns would be in with a shout as well. There's been so many outstanding players this year. I think it'll come down to who performs best now Sunday week and who wins the All-Ireland.
Yeah, very good shouts there. Dermot Burns, Barry Nash is definitely a serious shout there for player of the year. So lads, that has been the review of both the semi-finals and a quick preview for the All-Ireland final and our pick for who will be Hurler of the Year when it's all said and done. Lads, it's been an absolute pleasure. Make sure you check out Matt Hurley's podcast, the GAA Statsman podcast. Make sure you check out the articles done by the journalists Ger McCarthy and David Byrne as well. I've been Seamus Brady from the Play on GAA podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the GAA Sports Podcast. Until the next one, guys, take care.